The African Democratic Congress has never won a single governorship in Nigeria's history. It has never placed a candidate in the National Assembly with enough weight to shift a single debate. For most of its existence, it has been what political insiders call a warehouse party, registered, functional on paper, and strategically dormant. So, here is the question nobody in mainstream media is asking. Why would 5 sitting APC governors, 14 former ministers, and 8 former governors, people who collectively control billions in political capital, patronage networks, and electoral machinery, be preparing to move into a party that has never governed anything above a local council? This is not a defection story. Defections happen when politicians are running from something. What the numbers here suggest is that these people are running towards something, and whatever that something is, it was structured, not spontaneous. What exactly are they being offered, and by whom? That question will sit with you through everything I'm about to show you, and by the end of this analysis, you will have your answer. Before we go further, if you are new here, this channel exists for one reason: to give Nigerians the political analysis that mainstream media is too afraid or too compromised to deliver. Hit subscribe and stay with me. This gets deeper. Let's start with what actually happened, and more importantly, the gap between what is being reported and what is being buried. The reports of mass movement towards ADC did not emerge from a press conference. There was no resignation letter, no public announcement. They emerged from sources within the political class itself, whisper networks, back-channel confirmations, and in some cases indirect signals from the politicians involved, filtered through surrogates and media proxies. That is the first thing to note. The architects of this movement have not yet shown their faces. On the surface, the narrative being pushed is one of disillusionment. The framing is this: APC under Tinubu's consolidation has become too tight, too transactional, too punishing for those outside the innermost circle. The hardship of the current economic moment, fuel subsidy removal, naira collapse, the brutal cost of living pressure bearing down on millions of Nigerians, is being used as the moral justification for exit. But here is what that narrative deliberately obscures. 14 former ministers and 8 former governors do not share a single ideological grievance. They come from different geopolitical zones, different factional histories, completely different relationships with the presidency. The one thing that can unite that many senior political actors in a single directional move is not sentiment. It is a structured incentive. Now let me give you the historical context because this matters. ADC was registered as a federal party in 2006. It has contested every election cycle since 2007 without a breakthrough. But what is relevant is not its history of losing, it is its history of being used. In 2019, ADC served as a landing platform for a brief realignment attempt that ultimately collapsed because the coordination behind it fragmented before INEC's party registration deadline. The question now is whether someone has learned from that failure and structured this attempt differently. And here's the detail that almost every analyst covering this story has walked straight past. ADC currently holds INEC registration, a functional national secretariat, and critically, a leadership structure that was quietly reorganized in the months before these defection reports surfaced. The timing of that internal reorganization relative to these defection signals is not coincidental. Someone prepared the vessel before recruiting the passengers. Now let's go into the architecture, because understanding the legal and constitutional framework is where this story stops being gossip and starts to be strategy.
Under Nigeria's 1999 constitution as amended, a sitting governor who defects from the party on whose platform he was elected faces the risk of recall proceedings, but, and this is the critical point, not automatic removal. The anti-defection clause, as currently interpreted by the Supreme Court across multiple rulings, applies more cleanly to legislators than to executive office holders. This creates a legal gray zone, and experienced political lawyers know exactly how to work inside it. Here is where it gets more specific. Section 221 of the Constitution prohibits a candidate from campaigning for or against a party unless they are a registered member of that party. But the timing of when a governor formally defects relative to when INEC's candidate substitution windows open is where political strategy meets constitutional architecture. INEC's regulatory framework provides parties with a substitution window for governorship candidates. If sitting governors move to ADC before the substitution deadline for their state's next electoral cycle, they can effectively use ADC as a platform for re-election or for positioning their preferred successors without having spent a single day building that party from the ground up. Has this mechanism been used before? Yes, and the cleanest historical parallel is the 2014 to 2015 APC merger. That merger was not an ideological convergence, it was a constitutional and institutional maneuver. 5 separate parties merging under INEC's party merger regulations to create a single platform capable of defeating an incumbent president. The politicians now reportedly moving to ADC watched that playbook succeed. Several of them participated in it personally. Now, here is the institutional connection I want you to hold in your mind because it will come back. INEC's rules on party financing and candidate sponsorship mean that whoever is funding ADC's restructuring, covering secretariat costs, state chapter activations, convention logistics, holds enormous leverage over which incoming politician receives the party's ticket in any given state. The money behind ADC's restructuring is the real power center of this entire story. On paper, Nigeria's party system has checks: INEC oversight, internal democracy requirements, financial disclosure obligations. In practice, none of these checks have ever prevented a coordinated realignment by actors with sufficient resources and legal counsel. The checks exist. The architecture around them exists too.
Let us now look at who benefits, who loses, and what the actual calculation is. The aggregate profile of the reported defectors matters enormously here. 5 sitting governors means 5 states where APC's governorship machinery, local government chairman networks, and state-level patronage systems could become available to a new platform overnight. 8 former governors means 8 states where an ex-governor's residual network, ward-level mobilizers, traditional ruler relationships, business interests tied to state contracts can be activated without the legal vulnerability of a sitting official. 14 former ministers is the most analytically significant number in this entire story. Former ministers retain federal-level networks, contractor relationships from their ministries, civil servant loyalties, and in many cases, ongoing influence over parastatal appointments that outlasted their tenure by years. A block of 14 former ministers moving together is not a protest. It is a coalition with an asset base. Now, who loses most directly if this succeeds? The APC national leadership and, by extension, the presidency. A successful ADC expansion doesn't just cost APC votes, it fractures the patronage logic that holds APC's coalition together. Every governor who leaves demonstrates to every governor who stays that exit is viable. And that demonstration effect is the most dangerous thing about this story, more dangerous than the actual numbers. Let us talk about the electoral calendar because this is where everything connects. The relevant horizon here is 2027. That is not an arbitrary time frame, it is the only time frame that gives this move its logic. INEC's party registration and candidate sponsorship deadlines for 2027 governorship and National Assembly elections will force every actor in this story to show their hand within a specific window. Politicians who move too early lose leverage. Those who move too late miss the substitution windows entirely. The coordination implied by 27 senior figures allegedly moving together suggests that someone has mapped that timeline precisely. Now, let me address the regional dimension because it matters for the full picture. The reported defectors span geopolitical zones. A party that can credibly claim national spread, governors from the north, ministers from the southwest and southeast, former executives from the middle belt, can present INEC and the Nigerian public with the appearance of a national alternative. And appearance in Nigerian electoral politics is often sufficient to attract the next wave of joiners. Momentum is self-generating once it reaches a visible threshold. Now, here is the silence I want you to pay attention to. The Governors Forum has said nothing. The APC Board of Trustees has issued no warning. The presidency has not publicly threatened consequences. In every previous defection crisis, Saraki in 2014, the PDP governors who crossed to APC in 2013, there was immediate, loud institutional pushback. The silence here is either confidence that these reports are exaggerated or a decision that public confrontation would accelerate the exodus. Neither interpretation is reassuring for Aso Rock. And now, the piece that almost nobody has connected yet. The ADC move, if real and coordinated at this scale, may not primarily be an opposition play. It may be a negotiating tactic, a pressure signal designed to extract concessions from the presidency before a single formal defection letter is filed. Some of the most dramatic-looking realignments in Nigerian political history never actually happened because the threat of realignment accomplished what the move itself would have. The question is whether this is a genuine exodus or a structured bluff, and understanding which one it is requires understanding what the key players actually want. Now, if what I just told you surprises you, drop a comment below. I want to know what you think before we get to the part that changes everything.
Let us talk about this beyond the electoral arithmetic, because the consequences here reach ordinary Nigerians in ways that rarely get discussed. Nigeria's federal system is held together, in practice, not by constitutional design, but by the incentive structures of whichever party controls the center. When a ruling party's coalition begins to fracture at the gubernatorial level, the level closest to state resources, security apparatus, and INEC's state-level operations, the consequences extend far beyond vote counts. 5 states with governors whose loyalty to APC becomes publicly uncertain are 5 states where federal state policy implementation becomes contested. Infrastructure projects, security cooperation frameworks, joint federal-state revenue allocation negotiations, all of these require a baseline of political alignment to function. Governors in transition mode protect their post-office interests, not federal policy objectives. Now, remember the institutional connection I flagged earlier, the INEC party financing and candidate sponsorship architecture. Here's where I name it explicitly. Whoever controls ADC's finances controls which incoming politicians receive tickets. If a single financier or coordinating group holds that leverage over 27 senior figures, Nigeria is not looking at the emergence of a democratic opposition. It is looking at the consolidation of a parallel power structure outside the current ruling coalition, funded by interests that have not yet been publicly identified. And here is the historical pattern that should give every Nigerian a pause. In every electoral cycle since 1999, the party that successfully aggregated sitting and former governors ahead of a general election has either won or come close enough to force a negotiated outcome. In 1999, PDP did it. In 2015, APC did it. The ADC move, if it reaches critical mass, would be the 3rd attempt at that formula, but with one structural difference that makes it faster, cheaper, and less legally exposed than a full merger. It uses a pre-existing registered party rather than requiring a new merger process. Someone has done this calculation. The efficiency of the vehicle chosen itself is evidence of premeditation. Before I give you the full strategic outlook, I want to give the other side its strongest possible argument, because any analysis that doesn't engage with the best counter-argument isn't analysis, it's performance. Here is the most serious case against this story. Nigerian political defection reporting is routinely exaggerated. Sources within opposition circles have incentives to inflate numbers. 27 senior figures sounds more threatening than 7, and the threat itself has political value independent of whether the move ever happens. Until governors physically file formal defection notices with their state houses of assembly, this reporting remains unverified. That is a fair point and a serious one.
The Steelman version goes further. ADC has no electoral track record at the governorship level, no established national brand, no policy identity that would give defecting governors a credible platform to campaign on. Politicians of this seniority do not abandon proven electoral machinery for unproven platforms unless the rewards are exceptional. And exceptional rewards require exceptional financial commitment from ADC's backers, a commitment that has not been publicly evidenced. That is the strongest version of the counter-argument. It deserves respect. Here is why it ultimately falls short. It assumes that the destination party's track record is the relevant variable. But in the 2014 to 2015 merger, APC itself had no electoral track record. It was a newly registered entity. Track record was irrelevant because the merger brought its own track record with it in the form of the governors and structures that merged into it. ADC with 5 sitting governors and 27 senior political figures is no longer the ADC that lost every governorship race. It becomes a structurally different political entity the moment they arrive. Now let me address the 3 most common misconceptions about this story directly. Misconception 1, that this is primarily about policy disagreement with the Tinubu administration. It is not. The politicians reportedly involved span factional lines within APC that have disagreed with each other at least as much as they have disagreed with the presidency. Shared policy grievance cannot explain this coalition. Shared strategic interest can. Misconception 2, that the relevant competition is ADC versus APC in 2027. The more accurate framing is this: a coordinated block of political actors using ADC as a platform to reposition ahead of what they believe will be a contested 2027 cycle, with the possibility of further realignment, merger, or even negotiated return before election day. The destination in 2025 may not be the destination in 2027. The platform is a tool, not a home. Misconception 3, that former ministers and former governors are less dangerous than sitting ones. Former executives with intact networks, contractor relationships, and ward-level loyalties are often more mobile than sitting officials constrained by federal oversight and civil service accountability. A former governor can move money and mobilizers without a single signature on government paper. The absence of office removes constraints, not capability. And now the piece of evidence most observers on both sides have missed: the internal ADC leadership reorganization that preceded these defection reports. Parties do not restructure their national leadership on a quiet timeline unless they are expecting significant inflows. That reorganization, its timing, who drove it, and who funded it, is the primary evidence that this is not a spontaneous political moment. It is a prepared one. Here are the 3 most likely next moves and the specific signals to watch for each. Move 1. The presidency applies direct pressure, quietly. Before a single formal defection letter is filed, expect back-channel conversations. Federal appointments dangled, project releases accelerated to targeted states, and in some cases, implicit signals about EFC exposure for governors whose state finances cannot survive serious scrutiny. This is the standard first response. The signal to watch is whether any of the reported 27 figures suddenly becomes publicly enthusiastic about the administration's policy direction in the coming weeks.
That enthusiasm is not a change of heart, it is a receipt. Move 2. ADC holds a high-profile national event, a convention, a policy summit, a major press conference where the party's new direction is announced without the sitting governors present, but with enough former ministers and former governors to make the threat credible. This event, if it happens, is designed to force the sitting governors to choose publicly. Attend and formalize the break, or stay away and lose leverage over ADC's ticket allocation. Watch the guest list carefully. Move 3. A formal defection by one sitting governor as a test case. The first mover among the sitting governors will either suffer immediate and overwhelming institutional consequences, removal attempts, federal pressure, legal challenges, or he will not. If the first defection is not met with overwhelming force, the remaining 5 will move. The presidency knows this. The calculation from Aso Rock is whether punishing the first mover is worth appearing punitive versus the strategic cost of appearing weak by not responding.
Now, here's what escalation looks like. 3 or more sitting governors file formal defection letters within the same 2-week window. At that point, the story transitions from threat to reality, and APC's primary response tool, which is uncertainty about whether the move is genuine, disappears entirely. And here's what de-escalation requires: a credible offer from the presidency that addresses the specific interests, not grievances, interests of the key coordinators behind this move. Not all 27 figures matter equally. 2 or 3 individuals are the architects. Neutralizing their incentive to proceed collapses the coalition around them. Now, the question this entire analysis opened with: why would 27 senior political figures, collectively commanding billions in political capital and decades of institutional knowledge, prepare to move into a party that has never governed anything? The answer is not disillusionment. It is not principle. It is architecture. Someone built a structure, financed it quietly, timed it strategically, and is now populating it with political assets assembled from across Nigeria's most experienced political class. Whether this succeeds will depend on 3 things: the presidency's appetite and capacity for direct counterpressure, the identity and staying power of the financiers behind ADC's restructuring, and whether the first sitting governor to move is punished visibly enough to freeze the rest. The ordinary Nigerian should care about this, not because of which party wins, but because of what coordinated, funded, elite-level political realignment tells us about the health of our democratic institutions. When the most experienced political actors in the country treat parties as tools to be picked up and put down on schedule, the institution of party democracy itself is what gets hollowed out. Here's the final question for the comments. If the architect behind this ADC move has not yet been publicly identified, who do you think it is, and what do they want from a 2027 positioning that they cannot get by remaining inside APC? If this analysis gave you clarity, share it with one person who needs to understand what's really happening in Nigeria. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.